All right, hey everybody. So welcome back to our second Facebook Live event for the year. That's more of our typical Facebook Lives. We did kind of a demo last month, and what we're going to be talking about today is poison awareness, because it is Poison Awareness Month. And I'm getting some pop-up things. It wants me to close some other stuff, because apparently it's running slow. So let me try that. I'll close all of my other tabs and see if this doesn't help us to run a little bit smoother. Okay. Seems happy now. So hopefully that continues to go well. So poison can be defined as basically anything that causes harm to the body. And there's a difference between a poison and a toxin. Essentially is that a toxin needs to be produced by a biological animal or being, and then it also causes illness. So, for example, a Clostridium, if you get a Clostridial overgrowth, which a lot of people have heard about in the GI tract, it can happen to people as well. The Clostridium itself produces a toxin, and that is what makes you sick and gives you horrible diarrhea and things like that. So that's a toxin because it's made by a biological entity. A poison, on the other hand, can be inorganic. So it can come from a plant, but it can also come from a chemical or a man-made thing. So it's kind of like the whole square rectangle thing, really. So a toxin can be a poison, but a poison cannot necessarily be a toxin. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so a little bit of just terminology there. So what we're talking about is poisons, so it's a little bit more of the broader category when it comes to those types of things. So what essentially can be harmful when ingested or taken in, it can range from a lot of things, and a lot of it comes down to dose. So the difference between a medicine and a poison oftentimes is the dose or the amount that you have in your system. And so kind of the extreme example that everybody loves to use is the water example. So if you're dehydrated, water is an antidote, okay? And everybody knows water. If you drink way too much water, it can actually become poisonous, and you can get overhydrated and die, which has happened in some marathons and things like that people can do if they drink too much water. Basically what it does is it dilutes all of your electrolytes and everything else in your bloodstream, and if your heart doesn't have enough potassium going in the bloodstream, you'll have a heart attack and die, which is how that usually happens, if anyone was curious. So thinking about it that way, we are open to questions throughout this whole thing, and we really encourage you to ask me questions as we kind of go through. As I mentioned, this is a really broad category, so I'm going to try to focus on a couple things and keep it simple. Also touch on exactly what we do if somebody does come in with poison. So what I'm going to start out with is we do have a few questions that were submitted ahead of time, and I'll just start with those. And like I said, anybody who's listening or logged on, definitely give us a shout out. Okay, so first question, what can poison pets? What kinds of poisons kill animals? So poisons, as I kind of alluded to, can be a wide range of different things. What kinds of poisons can kill animals? A lot of times that depends on how much of it that they eat. Some of the really common ones that we like to hit on for cats in particular is lilies, especially coming up to this time of year. Everything in the lily family with plants is very, very poisonous to cats. Everything from the flowers to the leaves and all of that. So if you have a cat that likes to chew on plants, I would not get a lily. Other plants that tend to be of a poisonous nature would include poinsettias. We see those more around Christmas time. And then also a lot of your cactuses, if you have a cat that doesn't mind the spines, a lot of times those cannot be that greatest for them either. So particularly your Christmas cactus, their spines aren't as pokey. But if your cat decides to chew on that, it's not the greatest. So if you have a cat, again, that likes to chew on plants, I would actually recommend getting them some cat grass because they can eat that. Usually they prefer it as opposed to the poisonous plants, and it will keep your other decorative plants safe and your kitty cat safe as well. So if you're not sure if a plant could potentially harm your dog or your cat, then I would definitely, maybe shout out to us, or just make sure you know that there's a plant there that isn't going to harm them, and hopefully they'll chew on that one instead. For dogs, probably the most common poisons that they get exposed to tends to be things off of our plate. So these are things that just really disagree with dogs. In the best case scenario and in the worst case scenario can cause some major issues. So usually things that we talk about is you don't want to give your dog garlic, onions, those types of things. They can make them pretty sick. They can actually make them anemic in large quantities. So anemia is a lower red blood cell count. So you kind of want to watch that. Same with tomatoes, anything in the nightshade family. And then avocados don't do well with dogs, as well as grapes. So the confusion comes in with grapes because some dogs do not have a good reaction to grapes at all, and other dogs can eat grape salad and be totally fine. And what that comes down to is, why is it poisonous in one dog than another? And it's actually a genetic issue, a genetic predisposition. So some dogs have essentially a hypersensitivity reaction to grapes and others don't. How do you know if your dog has it? Well, honestly, feed them a grape. So we generally just tell people not to feed them grapes because there's so many other things you can give your dog. They don't have to eat grapes, and you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to find out whether or not it's going to hurt your dog. The other common one that everyone always talks about and comes to the forefront of people's minds with dog is chocolate. Chocolate can actually be a poison for both dogs and cats. What is in the chocolate that's causing the problem? It's the theobromine is the main ingredient that is the problem. So if you want to know, how poisonous would this chocolate be to my pet, just look at the theobromine content in there. So dark chocolate has way more theobromine in it than milk chocolate. So dark chocolate is much more dangerous as opposed to milk chocolate. And then it's also about quantity, right? So if you have a very large dog, obviously they're going to be able to handle a little bit more of it than a small dog or a cat. Medications can also be poisonous. As I mentioned, a lot of it comes down to dose in both the human side and then also in the animal side as well. Give me 1 second, I just need to cough really quick. So getting over just a little bit of a upper respiratory there. So, where was I? Right. So medications. So especially with our older owners, you tend to have your own little pharmacy for yourself at home, and you're wondering, oh shoot, my dog got this pill. Is that going to be a problem? A lot of the times it has to do with exactly what pill and what medication you're on. So we see a lot of dogs get into other people's heart medications. What can those do? Well, you're taking it a lot of times to alter your own blood pressure, to make sure that your heart stays in rhythm, those types of things. So it's going to do the same thing in your pet. And whether or not it's to the point where it would be poisonous for us to worry enough about it is going to depend, again, on how much they got. But you can see things like a low blood pressure, they're going to act really sleepy. They stand up, they're going to act kind of dizzy. We can get a racing heart in these pets, or high blood pressure, those types of things. So pot, when we see dogs and cats come in having ingested or been exposed to pot, again, it's a varying degree. If they get a small amount, well, honestly, they just get a little high, and they're going to fall asleep standing up. A lot of times they'll urinate or defecate on themselves. Those types of things, we just give them supportive care to kind of help them through that. If they get a high enough dose of it, though, then they can't thermoregulate their own body temperature, and they can get way too hot, and they can cause seizures, and then follow that by getting way too cold. So it can be life-threatening if they get enough of it. Again, how big is your dog? How much do they get into? Those types of things. Kind of along the same lines, we'll see similar issues with hops. So if we have any home brewers out there, hops are far more poisonous to dogs than pot is, but it's also going to screw up their thermal regulation. And so on a much smaller degree of what they can get into and be safe, A very small amount of hops can cause a lot of very serious problems in dogs and is quite life-threatening. So on the scale of poisonous, hops quite poisonous. Pot, usually you're okay, but it can get bad enough that we'd have to do something about it. So those types of things. I'm trying to think other common household things that you can get exposed to. I'll just kind of talk to them as they come to me. So what I'll kind of run through then is, what do we do, okay, when these guys come in? So a lot of times what we're going to do if we're worried about a poison exposure is we're going to run blood work. We're going to want to check our liver and our kidney function, all of that, which reminds me of another very common poison that gets talked about, which is antifreeze. We don't see so much antifreeze poisoning anymore because they actually changed the flavoring of the antifreeze that we use in our cars, so it doesn't taste as good anymore. So the car companies are trying to protect our pets. But if they were to get into antifreeze, the original old school antifreeze, then what you'll end up seeing is these really bad crystal formations in the kidneys, and the kidneys actually shut down and don't function properly anymore. They'll go from being able to create urine to not creating any urine at all. And obviously that's very life-threatening when your kidneys just stop working. Unfortunately, once they have that crystal formation in the kidneys themselves, there's really nothing I can do because I can't, even if I get the crystals to dissolve at that point, the kidney is never going to be functional again. So that's always really sad. If your dog does get into antifreeze, you are going to want to elicit vomiting right away. If your dog gets into brewer's hops or dark baker's chocolate, any of those types of things, or if your cat eats a lily, you're going to want to induce vomiting at home. Number one thing, best thing you can do. How do I induce vomiting at home? So easiest thing most people have in their cupboard is hydrogen peroxide. Okay, you're going to want to dose them with hydrogen peroxide. The exact dose is going to vary on the size of your pet, so feel free to give us a call rather than run through exactly how to calculate it here. Just give us a call, or give the pet poison hotline a call as well. They'll let you know how much you to give. At the end of the day, though, in all practical senses of the way, give it to them until they vomit, okay? You do run the risk of giving them too much. What happens if I give them too much? Well, you're going to irritate the esophagus, and you're going to cause maybe some ulcerations in that. If you know for a fact they've gotten into something that's highly poisonous, then I can fix an irritated esophagus. What I cannot fix is a dead dog. Okay, so if your dog gets into brewer's hops or things like that, give them some hydrogen peroxide. Things that can do to help them vomit after you give that to them is walk them around, essentially try to make it bounce in their stomach to bubble up more, because that's what makes them really nauseous, and then they'll vomit. If you cannot get your dog to vomit, or you just want to make sure that he's completely cleaned out, we do have drugs here that will make them vomit. We don't need to use hydrogen peroxide. We have we used to use an injectable apomorphine, and that would make them vomit. Now we use, it's actually a conjunctival drop that we put by their eye there, and it absorbs extremely quickly and induces them to vomit quite readily. Cats can be a lot harder to give hydrogen peroxide to. They're not big fans of you putting anything down their throat. And they also don't like to vomit as easily. So most of the time with cats exposure, you do need to just kind of run them into a clinic as fast as you can. Again, we're going to give them a drug to make them vomit. And then once they're completely cleaned out, then I give them another drug to get them to stop vomiting, because we don't want them to vomit forever. If you believe there was a toxin exposure beyond the point where we can make them vomit to get it back up out of the stomach, what do? Well, bring them in right away. Again, we're going to run that blood work, see if we have any organ damage or anything like that that we need to do supportive care for, or what we're dealing with. And then a lot of times we'll give activated charcoal. What does activated charcoal do? Well, what it does is it helps to absorb within the GI tract all of the different poisons, toxins, anything. So you can also use it for Clostridium that this pet could have still within their system, and keep them from getting within the bloodstream and causing the problems that you're seeing. And so it's going to keep it from getting worse, essentially. So that's why anytime there's any suspect of possible poison exposure, or we're worried about anything like that at all, we do give them activated charcoal, especially if we believe the exposure was beyond the first 2 to 4 hours, which is our window to make them vomit it back up out of their stomach and get it completely out of their system. So with that, we'll a lot of times do activated charcoal. Depending on how the animal themselves are doing, we'll also give IV fluids for supportive care. It's going to help us with those blood pressure changes, as I mentioned, if they get into different medications. The other thing it helps with is thermal regulation as well. We can heat the fluids or we can cool the fluids, and that's going to immediately go in the vein and help with that quite a lot. And then the other thing we do is we put them on seizure watch. So depending on what they get into, dogs oftentimes will get seizures. And so we'll give them medications to stop those seizures. We'll keep a really close eye on them, and if they start to seize again, we'll give them more medications. So a dog seizure is very scary. They tend to fall over, especially if it's with a poison exposure. They have what's called a grand mal seizure. And if you want, you can get on YouTube and see bunches of examples. The biggest thing, if you're trying to figure out, is my dog having a seizure or not, is call their name. If they look at you and they're still there mentally, probably not a seizure. If they're not there mentally, they have no concept of the fact that you're there, it's probably a seizure. Whether it's the whole body twitching and they're urinating and they're defecating, or they're just on their side and they can't seem to move, that is kind of your big telltale sign. So the way to think about seizures, okay, is if your pet is having a seizure, it's essentially a misfiring of the electrical signals in the brain. So think of it like your computer just totally, shutting down and it's got to reboot. So if you're able to comprehend, then you're not having an electrical misfiring within your brain. Okay, that's still functioning, so it's not a seizure. But you can still have issues where you cannot move the rest of your body. Okay, probably the most classic one of these that comes to mind is tic paralysis. So this is something we could talk about in more detail, maybe with a different lecture, if we want to talk about parasites again. But tic paralysis is a hypersensitivity reaction to the saliva of a tick, which causes a lower motor neuron disease in which the dog slowly becomes completely paralyzed. You have to remove the tick, and then the neurons will slowly be able to fire again, and the dogs usually do okay if you can give the amount of supportive care for as long as they'll need. How long does it need and how bad does it get really varies on the individual dog and the IgE, response that they have to the tick saliva. But like I said, we can go into more detail on that on another one, but that is just another example of something where they're not going to be moving correctly, but it's not a seizure, okay? And those dogs, they'll follow you with their eyes, but they just can't move their body. So again, that mental acuity is what we're looking for if we're trying to figure out seizure, no seizure. Different poisons that really elicit a lot of seizures. Most common are actually the rat bait and the mouse bait. So they used to be anticoagulants was the majority of the ones, and so those were actually pretty easy for us. We'd make them bond up what they could. What we couldn't, we would just give them vitamin K, and they did really good. The newer mouse baits, rat baits, they found that the anticoagulants weren't killing the mice fast enough. And so the other mice would watch their friend die and go, I'm going to quit eating that. And so then it quit working. So what they came out with was faster kill mouse baits and rat baits, and they actually work on the calcium channels. And as I mentioned, with those electrolytes, your body is way more sensitive to those. If you don't have enough potassium in your bloodstream, you have a heart attack. If you start messing with your calcium ratios in your body, you're going to get seizures, and you're going to get a lot more misfirings, and you're going to get a lot more brain issues with those. And so we'll see that a lot more with our newer mouse and rat poisons, and those are a lot harder. We do a lot of supportive care with them. We do a lot of IV fluids. We watch their body temperature. We cool them or heat them as needed, and we give them a lot of drugs to help stop the seizures. We had one dog in actually fairly recently who, unknown whether or not he had any exposure when he came in, but he was actively seizing. Young dog, no history of seizures at all, was totally normal when he let him out in the morning. When he came back a little bit later, the dog could not walk, was not acting right at all. He brought him into the clinic. He was actively seizing when he came into the clinic. We actually had to help carry him into the clinic because he couldn't make it up the sidewalk because he started to have a seizure. We did get him under control. We gave him IV fluids. We got his temperature back down to where it needed to be. It was very high. His temperature at its highest, I believe, was 107.5. And so we got that back down. And he did have a few cluster seizures, and so we were treating him multiple times to stop the seizures, but we were able to get them under control, and he kind of came out of it, which was wonderful. He was a great, very happy story. We did also give him activated charcoal. We do think that it was a poison exposure, some type of bait that was put out. We don't know what it was. We don't know exactly when he got into it. We don't know how much he got into. I actually think that the reason this dog did so well was because he was a very, very large dog. He was a giant breed dog, and he was a young dog. Young dogs tend to be a little bit more robust and able to come back from incidents like that a lot easier than our older pets. So older pets, everything's just harder to come back from. There's a lot of compensations going on in the body the older you get, and so anything essentially, you're looking for that straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak. And so you're going to find that straw a lot more often in our older animals, and so a lot of times they do recover. Sometimes there's some portion of their body that didn't recover as well as we would have liked. So those are kind of the main things. So just to kind of recap really quick before I go off on another tangent. So if you think your dog has had a poison exposure, first thing you're going to want to do is make them vomit. Second thing you're going to want to do is give us a call. We will let you know, okay, especially if you can tell us what it is they got into, how much it is they got into, and the size of your pet. We can tell you if you actually need to worry, okay? If you do need to worry, then what we'll probably have you do is bring them in. If you had successfully made them vomit at home, we may or may not make them vomit again here in the clinic, depending on how you feel, if they got it all up or not. A lot of times we'll go ahead and administer activated charcoal. We'll run some blood work, make sure we don't have any damage or anything that we can see thus far. And then depending on how the pet is doing, we may or may not hospitalize them with IV fluids and other supportive care methods, or we might just send them home. So a lot of it depends on how quickly we're able to find out that they got into a poison, how successful our treatments at home were, and how the pet is physically doing as they come into the clinic. So that's kind of a good recap for what do I do with poison exposure. So let's see here. How can you tell if your pet was poisoned? What are the signs and symptoms? So I kind of hit on this question a little bit. If your dog is having seizures or not walking right, if they're acting different mentally, a lot of times that's kind of your big hint that there's been a poison. Other things that you can see is kind of crying out with pain, sudden nausea, vomiting a whole lot. Now, that can get a little tricky because if you're just vomiting a whole lot, the first thing that we're probably going to do if you bring them into the clinic is shoot an x-ray to see if you have a foreign body or some type of blockage in your GI tract, because that's a lot more common these days than an actual poison exposure. But vomiting can be a big thing if they get exposed to a poison as well. Same thing with people, if you come in contact with a poison, you're going to be vomiting a lot. Heart arrhythmias, you're not really going to be able to see those at home, but what you would see is you would see some weakness, potentially unsteady when they're rising, or just not being able to get comfortable, panting for no reason at all. And if you put your hand on their chest, you'll feel a really fast heart or something that just doesn't feel normal. That would probably be the easiest thing to think about. So hearts can go really fast or they can go really slow. They can also skip beats, all those types of things. So if you like to pet your dog's chest a lot and you happen to put your hand on there because you're a little worried about him, if it just doesn't feel right, that might be a reason to go ahead and bring them in. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a poison exposure. No, there's lots of reasons you can get into an arrhythmia, but it's going to be on the list, and we're going to be looking at a lot of different things when you bring them in for that. So those would be kind of your big ones that you see at home. So I would say probably the most stark ones are going to be mental changes, followed by GI issues is what your main ones that you're gonna see. And then obviously if you know that they've gotten into something, or you had something and now you can't find it and it just went missing today, those types of things, those would be good shots in the dark there that maybe we've had an exposure, and you're gonna want to keep an eye on them. We already talked about what you can give to a poisoned pet. Biggest thing you can give at home is hydrogen peroxide. Make them vomit. Okay. How can we prevent accidental pet poisonings? So kind of the same way you prevent little tiny kid poisonings, right? So if you have a dog or a cat that likes to get in your cupboards, having, honestly, the child safety locks on them works really well. There are some cats who are pretty avid scavengers, and they will go in and they can open cupboards and hide in cupboards and find different things to eat anywhere and everywhere. And so child safety locks on cupboards works really well. And then also keeping your own prescription medications up high so that the animal can't get to it. And even keeping them in the prescription bottle does help quite a lot, because those tend to be a little bit harder for them to chew through. So they actually need a little bit more time in order to get to the bottle and actually eat the medication. I have still seen plenty of chewed through pill bottles, so if you're leaving for any extended period of time, I would still definitely put them up and in a locked cabinet or vanity, something like that. But at least keeping the pill bottles is going to be a good first step. I know a lot of people, especially if they're on a lot of medication, will have those little like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday things. They're really neat. However, they don't do a good job of keeping your pills safe. They're extremely easy to open. And if you drop them on the floor, a lot of times some of them will pop open as well. So if you have a pet that eats anything that touches your floor, that's probably not the best way to keep a hold of your medications, especially if you don't want your pet to get exposed to them. I did have one older client. It was actually before I graduated vet school. I was doing an internship at another clinic, and I went in and had a conversation with this lady, and to this day I still have no idea if she was giving the cat her meds and she was taking the cat's meds, or if the cat was getting its meds on time, or what was going on in that house. The cat was a hyperthyroid cat. So hyperthyroid means their thyroid is running way too fast, their base metabolism is way too quick, and we prescribed methimazole, which helps to decrease the amount of thyroid hormone in the cat's body, which would help alleviate a lot of the symptoms. So we kept running these thyroid tests on this cat to check how the thyroid was and if we needed to change the dosage or anything. And every time the cat came in, it was very, very high. And the clinician who was in charge of the cage, because like I said, I was just an intern, he had already upped the medication twice. And she came in this time, and the cat's thyroid was just through the roof. It was the highest it had ever been, which doesn't make any sense at all. So this medication can do a lot of things, but one thing it can't do is make the thyroid go even higher. And so he was busy, so he said, hey, just go in and have a conversation with her, try to figure out what's going on. Is the cat not taking the meds? Do we need to try something else? Do we need to get it compounded? So she just rubs it in his ears, like, what's going on? And so I had a very long conversation with this lady, and like I said, to this day, I'm still not sure who was getting whose meds or when, and she would tell me these very elaborate reasons how she knew that the cat had its med, and they would be completely unrelated. I think it was probably one of my most interesting conversations I've ever had with someone, because we would sit there and I said, okay, well, what time did he get his medication this morning? She goes, oh, he got it on time. I said, okay, well, what time is on time? She goes, well, I know he got it on time because I had to go to get my hair done on Tuesday, and then I had to go see my niece play soccer yesterday. So for some reason, getting her hair done 3 days before and watching her niece play soccer 2 days before meant that she had definitely given the cat the meds at the correct time that morning. And that was about as close to a straight line as I could get in that entire conversation as to how she was giving the meds and when she was giving them and if she was giving them on time. I think what he ended up doing, or what the clinic ended up doing for her, was we actually got her one of those Monday through Friday pill things. We asked her what color hers was, and we bought a different color for her. And we just dosed out all of the cat's meds with that and tried sending her home with the kitty's different color of the week and told her to come back in a week and we'd see what happened. I wasn't there when the cat came back, so I don't know if that actually worked or not. But I will always remember that. So if you're giving your cat your medications, or if you're taking your cat's medications, it's not going to work at all, and you could potentially run into a little bit of a poison exposure. So that's just a kind of a fun side tangent. Do household poisons have the same effect on both cats and dogs? So no, not at all. In particular, I always like to mention lilies. If a dog eats a lily, they're maybe going to vomit a few times, potentially get some diarrhea, upset stomach, that kind of thing. If a cat eats a lily, they're going to go into seizures and kidney failure. Okay, so it kind of tells you the difference between the species and their sensitivities to different poisons. That's probably the most stark example that comes to mind as far as poisons being different for dogs and cats. If I first notice that my pet has been poisoned at home, is it alright to induce vomiting? Absolutely. In fact, I highly encourage it. It's the best thing that you can do. Try to get them to vomit as much as you can. If you can't get them to vomit, bring them in here. We will get them to vomit. That is definitely the biggest thing. And if you're not sure, hey, was that bad for my dog to eat or not? It's not going to hurt your dog to make him vomit. Go ahead and start giving him a little bit of hydrogen peroxide while you're giving us a call. Okay, so have multiple people and have one person giving them a couple tablespoons of hydrogen peroxide to see if they'll vomit really easy. I wouldn't put the whole bottle down their throat, but just a little bit, see if you can get them to vomit easy while the other person's on the phone with us, or the Pet Poison Hotline. It is a wonderful resource. The people are very nice, and they're available 24/7. So you can always give them a call, and they can let you know if what your pet got exposed to is something poisonous that you're going to need to worry about, or if they're going to be fine. And they can also do the calculation for you like we will do here. They'll ask you how much they potentially got into, the size of the pet, and then also ask you if you were able to induce vomiting, how much do you think you got out, all that stuff. So those are all questions that we ask when it comes to poison. But poison does happen, so it is definitely something to keep in mind. Like I said, there's lots of different things out there. It would take a very long time to list everything that could potentially be poisonous. But if you have any question at all about if something is poisonous, definitely just give us a call. Sometimes things that you wouldn't think would be a problem could potentially be a problem, and then other things that you're like, oh my gosh, that can't be good. It's usually okay. Dogs tend to be less sensitive to poisonous substances than cats, as a general rule of thumb. Cats tend to just be more sensitive by nature. I think it's probably a compounded issue with them just simply being more sensitive genetically, and then also with them always being small. So it just does not take nearly as much to affect a cat or a cat-sized dog as it does to affect a 50-pound lab. Okay, and I think that's why or how labs get away with eating a whole lot of stuff. If you've ever had a lab, or you know anyone who's ever had a lab, they tend to eat a lot of anything they can get a hold of. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kind of wrap it up here. I do want to go ahead and say thank you again to everybody, all of our hardworking staff and members of the Carrollton Animal Hospital. We all work together here as a team to try to take the best care of all of our patients that we can, and it really wouldn't be possible without all of us. In particular, I want to always do my shout out to Dr. Gardner and Dr. Klein. It would not be possible without them, that's for sure. We are running a promotion through March 31st. It's pretty much just everything on the online pharmacy is 5% off. We went ahead and just did kind of a blanket promotion because there wasn't really anything in particular that would apply to pet poison awareness. So we just decided, you know what, let's just blanket the online store, give everybody a 5% off this month on that, and hopefully keep pets healthy, just in general. So next month is April, and we're going to be talking about heartworms. It's National Heartworm Awareness Month. Heartworms are a pretty nasty parasite carried by mosquitoes, and so we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what it is. They do actually have quite the complicated life cycle. So we talk about prevention for heartworms all the time. I'll go into the details of the illness that they can get if they do get it, treatment, how do we prevent it, why do we always talk about the prevention, and what the heck is up with that life cycle, because it gets a little bit more complicated. Since we're getting fancier, hopefully by next month I'll know how, I'll see if I'll be able to share a screen and then I'll be able to pop up a life cycle for you. I think that would be really fun. So I'm going to try to get more tech savvy as we go along here. And then we also just like to remind people to go ahead and follow our TikTok channel. We are trying to post some things. I think we've been a little bit slow lately, but we're going to try to post some more videos and stuff. So we always like to kind of highlight some of our cute pets and animals that come in here through the clinic with some fun scenes. So again, thank you very much, and I hope to see you next month.